Hi, this is Mare,
And TK.
and we are representing today Heart and Wallet. And today we wanted to have a conversation about faith and finances as it relates to marriage. We want to be transparent, a little transparent about our marriage and kind of our finance journey in marriage, and just open up to just kind of how we've moved in marriage and some things that we think may be productive for you guys to hear and us kind of talk through.
And so I'm really excited about this topic. This topic is very near and dear to me because it has me thinking about marriages as a whole. And so sometimes we think about other factors that can impact marriages, but we know finances are one that can really lead to marriages thriving or not thriving. And so I'm excited to talk to you all about what we have going on as it relates to understanding how we deal with finances.
Awesome, awesome. So, I guess the first thing I wanted to dive into is just, I guess, a little bit about our background from, I guess, a marriage as well as finance perspective. So, can you guess give them a little bit of background?
So we've been married now for 8 years, of course. And so when I think about our background, I think about when we first started dating or kind of going to courtship. And what was interesting about us is that we were already kind of thinking about finances in the beginning. And so I was telling someone some time back, as I remember how you were with finances and how transparent you decided to be in reference to finances. To one day I was sitting in my office and you emailed me a full financial statement, and I was thinking like, oh my goodness, what is this? So at the time I was working with a nice young lady, and I just told her, I said, girl, emailed me his entire financial statement. And what hit me then was the fact that I never had to be really transparent with my finances because I did everything. And so at that point, it was like God was kind of pretty much allowing me to kind of fall back in a sense to say like, hey, this is that time to be open because you guys are on this journey together. So even in that courtship, I recognized that I had to be transparent with even my financial picture so we can both know what we were going into. And so I told myself, oh, no goodness, now I got to tell them about these student loans. And so just kind of thinking about that, and then us moving forward to getting married back in 2017, and just kind of moving forward with a blended family and then an additional child and then now four. But it's been an interesting journey as it relates to financing and us just kind of pouring out to other people as well while we walk through our own journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned you hit on quite a few topics that are, man, amazing as it relates to marriage as well as finances. We had, like you said, I released my financials. I did that intentionally because, being about a little bit about my background, I knew that just from seeing other marriages as well as, uh, you know, my previous marriage, my first wife passed away. I just understood how important, finances were, and I wanted to make sure, before either one of us took the plunge, we were fully aware of what we were getting into. And so transparency at that point was really important to me. And building trust in the financial arena was also very important to me. So once we got married, of course, I felt like, okay, we're tracking, we kind of know the layout of each other's financial lives.
Hmm.
I realized at that point that, you were coming in with some student loan debt, and I was coming in. I had already paid mine off, but I understood, that student loan debt can be a bear. But outside of that, I think because we had those conversations early, I think we both felt like we were, pulling in the same direction financially, and I think that was a huge blessing to us together. Having that transparency on the front end, and I think that did definitely helped us build trust. Now,
Yeah.
full transparency to you guys is that as we progressed into the marriage, we still had some hiccups financially, or from a financial perspective. Um, I think as we'll continue to dive a little bit into, is that sometimes because of your family of origin, you may come into marriages still harboring or holding on to unproductive behaviors or thoughts about money that's not helpful in a marriage.
Right.
And so for
Hmm.
for me, I think I came in still really tight with money. I
Hmm.
think I think if I'm honest, I'm tight with money anyway. I think I probably I tell people a little story about when I was little. I remember my grandmother, my mom's mom, giving me maybe $1 to put into church, and if she gave me 4 quarters, I would probably put a quarter in and keep the other 3 quarters because that was kind of just who I was. But I don't know how much of that was nature and how much of it was nurture because we also grew up poor. My mom didn't have a lot, and so when I got a hold of money, I was going to hang on to it. So me understanding that about my history, I brought that into marriage, and so I've always been somebody who was going to count every penny and really be intentional about stewarding money. And so some of it, if I'm honest, I'm a good saver, but some of it is not necessarily because it's just such a great habit. It's some of it because I have had a healthy fear of not being poor.
Right. And then when I even think about my childhood, I grew up with a mom who was, she did save, but however, she was very liberal when it came to money. She would give to anybody. And so my dad stewarded money differently than my mom did to the point where he was a very, very good saver. And he would almost hold on as, very tight to money, just like, you did. And so even with us getting married, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm marrying my dad. But I called him my dad 2.0. But when I think about it, even with him being a good saver over time, I see the benefits of that, definitely thinking about him in this old age now. So when I think about myself, I brought in multiple factors. So I brought in some liberal parts of me where I would give. Then I brought in some things that said, I'm going to save. And so even as a child, I remember when you reflecting on the story that I would get lunch money every week, but instead of me paying for lunch, I would save that money and I would just wait till I got home to eat. And so my parents didn't even know I was not eating lunch, but I knew I was just saving that money.
Right,
So,
right. So it's just crazy how, Dave Ramsey talks about, in every family there's a spender and then there's a nerd or a person that's a saver. I think for us, I think both of us are savers. I think you might be a little more liberal in some aspects than I am, but of course there's always exceptions to the rule. Even for me, I spend money on electronics, so I think both of us are for the most part good savers, but we do have our areas that we like to
yeah.
touch. And so, with that said, I would love for you to just kind of share some of the obstacles or the things that I think since we've already kind of touched on the student loans coming in and maybe a little bit of my anxiety about the student loans once we got into the marriage.
Yeah.
But I would love for you to share a little bit more about just kind of, I guess, what, from your perspective, what the anxiety that I had about the student loans, how that impacted you, and I guess your ability to trust me, to be trust that I was going to be, I guess, generous in my reaction about other financial situations.
So I would say as it relates to the student loans, that did bring about a lot of anxiety. For us, neither one of us liked debt, but for you, you had already had a goal in mind coming in when you were going to retire, how you were going to be able to give to God's kingdom. And so those student loans kind of became a barrier for a moment. And so when we think about that, I remember telling myself, I was like, my goodness. I was like, he's really stressed out about these student loans. And I used to say he should have left me where I was. So not to say that's exactly what I would have wanted, but I would have wanted to get rid of the student loans. But however, they were definitely a barrier because one of the things, because you're an engineer by design and nature, in a sense, you paid attention to the interest rates. I didn't pay attention to interest rates. And so you knew how the amounts were ballooning at a certain time. So that caused some anxiety in you. So, of course, you preached even more about how we need to get rid of the student loans, how we need to pay them down. And so I even tell you, I did tell you to a certain extent, I was like, you created a monster because when you started, I kept going. Even when you knew that, hey, we could kind of slow down a little bit because you see now how it's breaking out. I still needed to kind of push forward with us paying off the student loans because, for one, it wasn't just about paying the student loans off. It was about getting peace. And so having peace where you didn't feel that anxiety and neither did I feel the anxiety. And so we could kind of just rest and have that peace in our home.
Right,
So,
right. So I think the thing is, as we learned, we recognize that, you know, once again, how each one of us came in and how each one of us were parented or just the way we related to money, it can definitely have an impact on, you know, your marriage. one of the things that I do really value about, just once again, the way we came into the marriage is the fact that, both of us had a heart to honor each other and the way that we communicated about the finances. Now, I think full transparency, we have had some moments where the transparency what didn't always feel there,
Right.
and so and some of that is directly related to the way I guess I've responded in terms of finances in general. So I would love for you to talk about, just kind of your birthday party situation, your 40th birthday party
Bring that
situation.
up. Well, because in my mind, I felt like, okay, I've gone through a lot in life and I've overcome a lot. So I really want to celebrate. And so I wanted my party exactly the way I wanted my party. And it's not that I didn't think about the numbers and didn't think about the finances, but because of how we have been working through the student loans and how that had produced anxiety, or it may have been the way things have been communicated or how there was a response to it. It kind of led me to kind of think like, well, I'm going to go ahead and plan this party and I'm just going to spend the money that needs to be spent, but I'm not really going to share how much money is being spent. I'm just going to keep planning this party and keep moving full force ahead. And so that did kind of cause some issues as it relates to transparency for us. And so I guess you can kind of speak for what you felt even in that. I know for me, I kind of felt like, okay, oh, this is nothing. But however, even just saying like, oh, this lack of transparency is nothing, it can still be something because you're just kind of looking at it from your view lens as opposed to the other person's.
Right, and I'll be honest with everyone. For me, it was a lot more than nothing because, from the beginning of our marriage, actually before the beginning of our marriage, I had been purposeful in being transparent. So for me, it felt like okay, it felt like a little bit of disrespect, a little bit of hiding, and I had seen my dad and my stepmom, and how my stepmom would hide stuff in the closet that she had bought that was new that still had tags on them, and then pretend like they were old items. So I had seen growing up how divisive I guess spending habits could be when people weren't honest, and I understood that, and so I guess for me, I knew TK wanted a nice birthday party. If I'm honest, I think I also knew I probably didn't want to spend as much money as I felt like she was going to spend. I knew about some of I guess, the catering that she was planning on doing. And so I don't think I would have necessarily been totally on board with the totality of it. But I felt like, from my perspective, that I would at least be willing to listen to what the budget was. But in that situation, she didn't really give me an opportunity. Uh, I didn't really get a complete feel for how much it was until afterwards, and I don't think I ever really got a number even after that. And so that definitely built some tension and anxiety, and if I'm honest, a barrier between us because I had a little resentment about that. Now, in hindsight, I see that uh, it's easy to want to point the finger at the other person and say,
Right.
okay, well, they didn't tell me the truth, or they didn't come up, they didn't tell me the story.
Oh, sorry.
But at the same time, also can see my role in that, in terms of not making it easy, or because of how much anxiety I had about just spending in general, that didn't help her be able to relax enough to say, okay, this is what it is. Now, I also acknowledge that even if she had came to me, even if I didn't have a bad response about what she was planning, there's still the reality that maybe we wouldn't have been on the same page in terms of total
Right.
costs. So we would have had to battle through that. But from my perspective, I never even got a chance to battle through that. But uh, the reality is, when you're thinking about these type of situations, you have to acknowledge that it's rarely one sided. It's rarely one person doing wrong and the other person is completely the victim. A lot of times there are situations where both parties, if they're honest, can say, okay, I have
Yeah.
my share to blame. And so that's one of the things that we've learned, is that, hey, if we're going to do this well, number one, we have to be transparent. We have to be
Right.
honest. We have to share our hearts about stuff.
Yeah.
And then we have to be willing to after we've been transparent, go back in our separate corners and pray and ask God, what is His desire?
Right.
Because in that birthday party situation, had TK been able to be transparent with me, I might have gone back and said, well, Lord, this is more money than I think we should spend. What's your heart on it? And she could have asked the same thing, Lord, this may be too much money for us to spend.
Yeah.
Not my will be done, but let yours be done. But because we didn't have that transparency, because I didn't make it easy for her to be transparent, that situation didn't get resolved well at all. To the
Right.
point where, it took a couple years before we really was able to hash it out,
Talk back through it.
and be honest about the situation. And so,
Right. Even to the point where you say a couple of years, and this can just be for anybody, a couple of years, and then when it comes back up, the next person's kind of throwing something out. Well, you did this also, and you did this, and so it's kind of like a tit for tat thing at that moment, as opposed to kind of resolving what came about in that instance.
right, right. And so once again, no matter how your marriage, I guess, is functioning, whether or not you guys are fully committed to sharing 100% of your income with each other in one bank account, whether you have one central account and then both of you guys have your own accounts, or whether you just have two separate accounts and y'all pay portion of the bills. I guess at the end of the day, how you steward that is really up to you. However, one of the things I can safely say is that I think God still regardless, God desires a marriage to be on one accord.
Right.
God desires for two flesh to become one flesh. And how can two flesh become one flesh if there's no transparency? If one person is doing something totally outside of what the other person purview is,
Right.
or especially on the important things. Well, I'm not talking about how much money you may have spent on lunch, unless that's a problem
In your
area
marriage.
yeah, for your marriage. But when we talk about the big purchases, the big things that matter, I think for us, we recognize that God's desire is for us to be on one accord, and God's desire for marriage is for people to be on one accord. And so, TK, let's talk about a little bit more about just the reality that now that we've been together, married 8 years, how we're trying to move now, and what are we trying to focus our attention on from a financial perspective?
So the way we're moving now, definitely different than when we first got started. We're moving in a way where we kind of focus in on that transparency, being honest with one another, and recognizing that we have long-term goals that we're trying to reach as a family. And so understanding that we have the same mission, we have the same vision as it relates to how we want to use our finances. And so with us, that's building God's kingdom for one, also being able to be a blessing to others around us as well as our family. And then also teaching our kids about how they should move with their finances. And so that's been a part of kind of how we've been moving. So you can kind of speak a little bit more about kind of how we're looking at we're building God's kingdom, and also kind of how we're helping our kids. But overall, we want to make sure that we're maximizing everything that God has given us. And that's including our finances, because ultimately that was His first before it was ours.
Right, right. No, absolutely, TK. I think it's important for especially Christians to have a heart, even in their marriage, towards, okay, how can I, number one, if you're a husband, how can I, number one, steward the finances to support this family?
Right.
And then as God gives you increase and overflow, how can I also be a blessing to those outside of the household? And so it's always important, if as you have kids, to model what it is you want to see in them. And so we have definitely in our marriage try to take steps to show them, hey, that number one, we're going to, as me, especially as a husband, I'm going to make sure that I have everything, all the needs met for the household, that I have everything that my wife needs, that the children need. And then also we're going to care for those who are less fortunate to us. We're going to make sure we are able to provide opportunities to be a blessing to those who are less fortunate. So we definitely have tried to do that well. From your perspective, TK, what do you think we've done well outside of the stuff we've already talked about from a financial perspective?
Wow, I think we've done well with setting out the long-term goals, and so recognizing that it's not just about today; it's about what's to come. You know, we don't know, we do not know how long that God will have us here on this earth, but just really kind of thinking through that. And so I have to give you credit for that. I know I'm the one that I'm constantly checking bank accounts, checking whatever accounts I need to check on a daily basis, and managing that. But you've done a good job with just kind of looking at the whole picture and being able to show us like this is where we are going to be going and this is how we need to be moving. And so I think that's pretty much that's a plus when it comes to kind of thinking about how we're moving in this marriage now.
Right, right. And that's a really good point, TK. I think when you're talking about the financial discussion, the finances is only a small part of the overall big picture.
Right.
The overall big picture is really how does the finances support the mission and vision of the family itself. And full transparency, I love that word, transparency. We just recently, earlier this year, started working through a family mission and vision. And a big part of that family mission and vision was, stewardship and how
Right.
we were going to steward our finances. And I think overall, when you think about marriage, when you think about finances in marriage, the big key is in order to be able to have success in finances in marriage, is that you have to have the same vision
Right.
for the finances in your marriage. And I think that is something that is a big reason why so many people struggle. Before we had this conversation, you and I were just talking about how, there may be a husband who makes good money, that the wife still doesn't feel like, okay, we're doing well financially. And it's not necessarily because the husband is not making enough money. It's because he has a different vision for what those finances should be for versus the wife. And so one of the things I think, we've done a good job of, even before we wrote a mission and vision statement, was really try to identify the things that we cared about
Yeah.
together
Yeah.
and say, okay, let's prioritize these things. Can you give a good example of a situation where we demonstrated that well?
So I would say we've demonstrated that well in how we give. And so we've prioritized giving to the kingdom, just like I mentioned before. And so even just the other day, just recognizing that the decisions we've made as far as giving to the kingdom, how they're impacting other people. And so, for example, just receiving a newsletter from Delta Streets, how they're impacting and changing the lives of boys in the Mississippi Delta. And then also just thinking about where we're positioned now. We're currently homeschooling our kids using a collaborative model. And so because of how we've moved with our finances and we've been on the same page and we've had the same goals and vision, we're now able to do that for our kids, spend more time with them, shepherding their hearts and pretty much pouring into their lives. And so it basically took us working together over these past few years and to get to this place. And so a lot of that included being on one accord with our finances because we have a collaborative model that we're using. And so that does cost money. And so we think about if we weren't on the same page, like what type of debt would we still have? How would we be spending our money as opposed to kind of aligning that money to go towards exactly what it needs to go in the things that we set out to do?
Absolutely, absolutely. So TK, if you could speak directly to wives about, I guess the heart of God as it relates to finances, what do you think that messaging would be?
So I think what I would share with wives is that I'll kind of go back to kind of how I moved into this situation with this marriage is that what we have to do is we have to trust God. And so when you trust God, that means that sometimes you have to die to yourself. That means that you have to recognize that there's ultimately a goal that God wants you to achieve. It's not about, putting your money together so you can buy the biggest house or you can buy the biggest car, unless that big house is so you can be a blessing to people and bring them into your home. It's pretty much about making sure that you're on one accord so that you can grow closer together because God needs you to grow closer together so that when the enemy comes in, you both can recognize when there's something off-putting. But if you're divided and the finances have you divided, it's going to have your emotions divided. It's going to have that intimacy level divided in your marriage. It's going to have that ability to really just grow. And so those are things that God doesn't want. He doesn't want those things to be a stumbling block for the growth that he can do within that marriage, because God loves marriage. He wants marriages to be an example and a blessing for the world to see. And so being on one accord helps that process. And so I will say is that if you find yourself saying that I got to do like grandmother said back in the day, where I need to have my stuff set to the side for a rainy day, try to let that go and try to give that over to God, to say, God, I trust you in this. So if you are saying that we are one, let me trust and let me believe and let me walk this out, that we are truly one. So whether that's in how we move with other decisions or even our finances or just in word, let it be true in the totality of the whole entire marriage. And so I would definitely want to point that out strongly to the wives that are kind of thinking about how they should move. And even if you're in a situation where maybe, like Marae said, the husband has a different goal than you think you all should have, that this is a good time to just kind of come together and begin to say, okay, I know we've moved in this direction, but what goals do we have long term for this family? What goals do we have for ourselves? How does God want us to move? So seeking God and going to him in prayer and kind of being able to really truly know how you should be moving, how he should order the steps as it relates to how you should deal with those finances.
Awesome, awesome.
And what about you? What can you share with husbands?
I would say, especially to husbands, that ultimately God has put it on your shoulders to be the provider. Uh, that doesn't mean that you get to fully dictate, I guess, what all finances are spent on, but it definitely means that you're providing and providing the essentials. I think a lot of times what I've seen in men is, because of that mandate or because of that call, we take I guess liberties, and we take it further and say, okay, because I am the provider, I get to dictate we're going to spend money on in terms of pleasure purchases. And once again, nothing wrong with pleasure purchases, but I think ultimately what I would say to any man is that make sure you're considering your family. Family is, and finances should always be first. Your family needs first, and then the overall wants of you and your spouse, not simply what you want. And let's just be honest, there's a lot of men, boys out here that have still held on to video games and all that. And once again, nothing wrong with video games, nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of your labor, but it's all about priority. I think men need to prioritize the essentials first, considering the needs of their spouse, considering the needs of their kids, and then considering their own wants after all needs have been met. I think that's the biggest thing. And so once again, even for those men who are very responsible, I would say the ones that do provide all the needs of the family, also, before looking at simply what I want, making sure that you're looking at what your wife wants as well, and sharing those joys with her, and and honestly, just be honest, putting her wants up ahead of yours. And I know that's sometimes scary even for men, because sometimes you may be wondering, would she do the same for me? And that can be challenging. But ultimately, if you're trying to be the man that God has called you to be, definitely putting needs first, and considering her wants to be just as important as yours, if not a little more important, and praying that she takes the same approach.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think with two people being willing to, I guess, lay aside their own wants, man, finances become a lot easier. And it doesn't mean that there aren't situations where, people aren't even able to talk about wants because needs aren't getting met. I get that. But a lot of times, in a lot of situations, sometimes needs aren't being met because wants have taken priority.
Right.
And so that's the other thing I would say to men, is just making sure that you prioritize the things that are most important first, the needs of the family, before you prioritize wants for yourself or even for your wife, and being willing to gently lead when it comes to money. Like I said, my big thing is, I've never been a mean person. Well, I don't think I'm a mean person, but I've never been the type of guy that was going to just be unruly, but I don't necessarily always, I guess, have the best responses or just the nicest way to put things when I'm not in agreement with a particular purchase. And so I'm learning to, you know, to not frown up as much, to just listen, and even being willing sometimes to say, okay, you know what, maybe this is not something that I think we need to do right now, but being willing to actually take it to the Lord, and just like the Lord does with us, not necessarily say no, but sometimes just come back and say, not right now. Let's figure out a way that we can get this at some point, but not necessarily today. But once again, having a gentle spirit is and how I communicate that not right now.
Right. And I would say too, and this just kind of hit me, especially if you're in a situation and you haven't been quite transparent. This is for like husbands and wives. And you may have just kind of gotten yourself into a little trouble because of that lack of transparency, and meaning there may be some debt that's kind of piling up. But I think this is a good time to kind of start from scratch, to just both parties be on one accord and bring that to the table. As hard as that may feel, bring it to the table now to start anew, so that you could begin with that transparency and you could begin to kind of start working some of those things out. And so that just kind of hit me as you were sharing what you were sharing. And I was just like, we definitely want to make sure we kind of highlight that for sure.
Right, right. And once again, I think when two people are on one accord, things just go better from a marriage perspective. Whether or not you guys share full access to bank accounts or not, I believe God's desire is to be on one accord about how you're leveraging those finances. Even if the one accord is the husband saying, "Hey, babe, you ain't got to worry about putting nothing toward the finances." If that's what your one accord is, then so be it. But just making sure that both of you guys are actively being on the same page in the things that you pursue. And so I think I would just love to kind of end it by, unless you have anything else to say, by saying that we want to encourage everybody that's listening to this to, no matter where you guys are with your finances, in terms of your relationship, in your marriage, with your finances, to be willing to have an open, honest conversation if there is some discord about where you are. Right. I think the reality is there cannot be any healing, or there cannot be any growth without first being willing to say, okay, this is where I am, this is where you are. How can we be better together? What areas in our financial past, or even our relational past, haven't we done well in, or we haven't been on one accord? And how can we get on the same page? And here's the thing, according to James 1:5, God says if we ask, God is willing to give us the wisdom that we need in these areas. And so we don't have to ask if God is for marriage. We don't have to ask if God desires unity in marriage. We don't have to ask if God desires unity in your finances in marriage. We already know the answer to those is yes. So because of that, I think I can say in full confidence that God desires each and every one of you to have better financial relationships in your marriage. And a good way to do that is to come together, have honest conversation, where there is still misunderstanding or hurt feelings. I believe that asking God to continue to heal that and give you guys an opportunity to become stronger together will work. And ultimately, if I guess there's still discord, then of course there's nothing wrong with getting outside counsel to strengthen that. But here's the thing. I think TK told me the statistic is like over 52% of marriages are ending because of financial strife. We want to make sure that we're helping families and we're encouraging families to be preemptive. Don't wait until it boils over or it gets to the point where both parties are like, you know what, I'm done. She does what she wants to do, or he does what he wants to do with his finances. So we're going to put this wall up. Because here's the thing, one of the things about walls, it's once you put one wall up, it's so easy to put others up in other areas.
Right.
And so if you can tear the financial wall down, you can also begin to determine where are those other areas that the enemy has set up in your marriage to try to circumvent what God is trying to do. So,
Right.
anything else, TK?
I think this has been good.
All right, all right. Well, once again, this is Heart and Wallet. Our goal is to help others to value and recognize just how much the heart plays into financial decision making and financial just finances in general. And so we hope this has been productive from a marriage perspective. We would love to get your feedback. We would love if you would like and subscribe to our channel and tell others about us. Thank you.